I've always loved dogs, so I feel fortunate that I had so many dogs in my life. But every time I've ever got a dog, it's been one of those things where I've had to work pretty hard to get it. So when I was about 6 years old on the farm, I had a little dog, little Maltese Terrier. And he was my pal. And everywhere I'd go, that little Maltese Terrier would be right at my heels. My mother used to make all my clothes. I wore Buster Brown suits. He'd come running after you. He'd always come up and grab you in the heels. We wore stockings, so my mother was always having to repair the stockings because he'd tear them out. And one day, my brother Roy went to town in the buggy, and he let the dog follow him. And when he got into town, we lost the dog, never saw him again, and that was a big tragedy.
When Walt was 9 or 10 years old, he had a job delivering newspapers, and dogs were a big part of his daily routine.
I'd sell a couple of papers and get a nickel. Well, I'd go in and buy a nickel's worth of bologna in a butcher shop, and I'd carry it in my paper sack, and of course you'd get quite a few slices of bologna for a nickel in those days. I'd share it with these dogs. I'd pick up these strays. Then I'd bring them home. And my mother didn't like dogs. And I had a backyard with a fence in it, and I'd put it in there, and I'd say, "No, Mother, don't let it out. Let me let it out when I come home." I'd get home, the dog was gone. My mother'd say, "Oh, it got out of the fence some way." And I know darn well she let that dog out.
When Walt was working with the Red Cross at the end of World War I, he found a dog there, too.
Now, when I was driving an ambulance in France, Boy and I bought ourselves a couple of German shepherds, a little puppy. And when we traveled, we carried our things in a little what we call musette bags. So I used to put my puppy right in the musette bag. And everywhere I went, that little puppy was with me. We'd have to get a hotel for the night if we're somewhere. I'd push him down and he wouldn't make any noise. They didn't know I had a dog. I'd take him right up and he'd sleep right in bed with me. When we got our first home, I wanted a dog. And my wife would have nothing to do with dogs. For some reason, she did not like dogs. She said, "Oh, they get hair on everything. They're dirty." So I kept reading about different dogs. Finally, I had a story on the Chow. The Chow did not shed hair. The Chow does not have fleas. And I read this story to her about the Chow. And she said, "Well, if I had to have a dog, that's the kind of dog I would want." That's all I wanted. The next day, I went out and bought a Chow, 6, 8 weeks old, and I kept it under wraps until Christmas. I had a big hat box, put the little puppy in the hat box, tied it up with a ribbon, and put it by the tree. And it said, "To Lily, from Santa Claus." And my wife said, "Oh, Walt, you didn't." She thought I'd bought her a hat. And that's one thing she don't want anybody to do. She wants to buy her own hat. So when she started to open it, it moved. And she let out a scream. And when she opened it, this little Chow stuck its head out of there. And from that time on, that was her baby. And my gosh, she wouldn't let it out of her sight. It had to sleep in our bedroom.
Although Chows are known to be a fairly aggressive breed, Sonny wasn't that way at all. And in fact, when Diane was born in 1933, Sonny welcomed her warmly into the home.
Well, the dog lived to be 14 years old. After the Chow died, I wanted another dog. But to get this next dog was quite a chore. To Lily, no other dog could ever equal that dog, so I mean, it was just not good enough. And we finally ended up, I got my daughter a poodle.
Duchess Disney, that was her name. We called her Dee Dee for short.
When Diane and Sharon were young, they used to go to the studio with Walt when he had work to do there on the weekends.
He'd go over to the studio, but we always kind of just hung around. "Oh, when are you going to go home, Dad? How much longer are you going to stay here?" Sharon was his buddy for a longer time, but then there came a time when Sherry left him, and that was the crushing blow, I think. And then we had our old brown poodle, and he'd take her with him. He used to go over to the machine shop at the studio at night. He had a workshop up here and work on his train and on his little miniatures. And he'd take Dee Dee with him. She was an old brown clod. She had not a spark of life in her, but she was really lovable and very understanding to Daddy.
The poor thing was never well, but she was a great consolation to me. I'd go down to my shop to work. At a certain hour in the afternoon, that poodle knew it was time for me to come up and meet with the family. And she'd sit and look at me. She wouldn't leave my side until I moved. When Dee Dee died, the kid said, "Mother, you got to let Daddy have another dog." But I said, "I'm not going to pick the dog out, because if I do, you won't like it. Now, if you pick the dog out," I said, "I will like it." She's more particular than I am. I like any dog. She went from one kennel to another and looked dogs over, and she'd come back, and no, she didn't like that dog. The thing had to just be right for her. Finally, she came home, and she had this little ball of fur, you know, when she brought it in here, and it's the same way with this dog as it was almost with Dee Dee. She's crazy over that dog. We call her Lady because it came about the time Lady and the Tramp. The cartoon feature Lady and the Tramp was an original with us at the studio. I had the basic idea for this story. I had the lady dog and a lot of situations about her. So my friend Ward Green wrote a few short stories. Among them was one about Happy Dan, the something or other dog. He didn't believe in tying himself up to any one master. He would wear no man's collar. He was a kind of a character that I thought Lady ought to meet. So I actually took my story to Ward, and I said, "Ward, your dog and my dog have got to get together."
I saw Lady and the Tramp as a child and was very moved by it, and in particular the Bella Notte spaghetti scene, which has become one of the top romantic scenes in all of film history.
Dad has this sentimental regard for animals. You can see when he's with animals that he's looking at a personality. He gets it out of them, and a humor in the things that they do.
We went for the personality of each dog. There's a lot of pathos in it. There's a lot of good, solid humor. The emotional appeal that we had was the most important thing.